Hello and welcome to Train Signal. You're watching how to build a vSphere lab environment updated for vSphere 5.1. We'll start this lesson off by answering the question, why should you build a vSphere lab environment to begin with? Why should you go through this process, this effort at all? Why is it important to have a vSphere lab environment? Well, there's a number of different reasons. Let's talk about those. Starting with testing. There's many different scenarios where you need to test vSphere or third-party applications, or perhaps even a custom application that you've created against VMware vSphere. Perhaps you just want to test the latest edition, in this case vSphere 5.1, in a lab environment. You don't want to test anything in your production environment. You might even bring down the entire virtual infrastructure by testing, let's say, a new feature if you misconfigured it. So all the more reason to create a vSphere lab environment. You can test whatever you need to, whatever you'd like in the lab environment. It's safe. You can't get fired. You can't get in trouble. You can't screw something up. The second reason here is learning. Perhaps you just want to learn VMware vSphere. You might be interested in certification, which we'll talk about in a second, but maybe not. Maybe you just want to learn vSphere and be able to put it on your resume or see if it's a valid solution for your company. You'll never know unless you try it out for yourself in a lab environment. The third reason here is training. You might be going through a training class. Perhaps you're taking it online. You need access to your own lab environment. Perhaps you're watching my vSphere 5 video training course from Train Signal, and you want to create your own lab environment and gain training hands-on with VMware vSphere. A lab environment is the best way to do that. And who knows, perhaps you're even training others. Maybe you're a trainer, you want to train some junior admins at your company. You would want to do that in a lab environment. And then the last and final reason here is certification. Perhaps you're preparing for your VMware Certified Professional or your Advanced Professional certification, the VCAP, DCA, let's say, the Data Center Administration certification. Doing that in a lab environment is the perfect way to do it. You can do it entirely on a laptop, or maybe you want to buy one or two physical servers to do it. We'll talk about that in just a second. But these are the four different reasons in my mind why you should build a VMware vSphere lab environment. And I'll throw in one final bonus reason, and that is demonstration. Perhaps you're a consultant. You go around, you talk to customers about VMware vSphere. Perhaps you're a salesperson or pre-sales. What better way to demonstrate VMware vSphere or a solution related to vSphere, like a third-party application or a storage solution, by doing it in a virtual lab environment that you might even just carry on your laptop, open it up, and show them a virtual data center all running in a virtual lab environment. So now let's talk about the difference between a physical lab environment and a virtual vSphere lab environment. You're going to have to choose which solution you want, if you want to build a physical lab environment or do it completely virtual. Each solution has its own pros and cons. We'll get started by talking about the differences between a physical vSphere lab environment and a virtual vSphere lab environment. So starting off with physical. When I say physical, I'm talking about buying physically one or two or even more physical servers, putting them in your closet, under your desk, in the garage, wherever you have room, and creating a physical lab environment, a small data center running in your office or in your home. The first benefit to doing this is that you'll get the best performance and much better performance than a virtual lab environment because you have dedicated physical servers. You're not trying to shrink the whole thing onto your desktop or laptop computer. You've got dedicated servers that were designed to run VMware vSphere, or at least server operating systems. So you're going to get the best performance. It's also going to be much more reliable. You're not going to be interfering with your email and your web browsing when you're trying to run your lab environment. You're not going to slow your laptop or desktop to a crawl because you allocated too many resources. You've got dedicated hardware. Now, two downsides to a physical lab environment. First off, it's large in size. It's going to take up some space. It's going to use electricity. It might be loud. It might put off a lot of heat, and you have to turn down the air conditioner to keep it cooled down. It's going to take up space. It might be annoying to your spouse. Your kids might come and turn the servers off. I've had all this happen, believe me. If you have it in an office, again, there's some downsides there. You're going to need power. Your boss might be asking, what the heck is all that equipment? That stuff is annoying. You need to get it out of here. So there's some downsides, of course, to building a physical lab environment. Of course, the bigger it gets, the more troublesome it could be. Once you throw in some storage, maybe you get a storage area network that was coming off of lease from the production data center, and you could end up eating a lot of power, cooling, and space with a physical lab environment. The other downside is that it's potentially very costly. Now, on the small side, you could buy just one server. Perhaps you build it yourself. You might just spend, let's say, $1,000 US. But on the high end, you could spend, many thousands of dollars, as many as you're willing to put in. So it's going to be much more costly than using your existing desktop or laptop computer. On the other hand, as we said, much better performance, more reliable, and it's not going to interfere with your daily work running Microsoft Word, email, and web browsing. Now, if we look at the virtual lab on the right-hand side, it's less expensive. You can use your existing desktop or laptop computer. It's much more portable. You may be able to do it using evaluation licenses. You may be able to do it using evaluation licenses from VMware. Let's say VMware Workstation or Fusion. They're available with a free 30-day evaluation. VMware Vsphere 5.1 is available with a free 60-day evaluation. So within the first 30 days, you could run a virtual lab environment at no cost, assuming it was able to run on your existing desktop or laptop computer. It's easy, it's efficient. You don't have to order anything off of eBay or order anything, let's say, from Dell or HP. It's not going to use any more electricity. It's not going to put out any more heat. It's not going to cause any more annoying noises. There's no high-speed fans running. The downside is it's much less performance. Some features may not work at all, like VMware fault tolerance. It's less reliable. It could cause problems, interfere with your email. Who knows? It might even cause your laptop to crash. I've had that myself. It doesn't happen very often, but it is a possibility once you completely maximize all the resources on your laptop or desktop computer. My point being, each of these has their own set of pros and cons, and you need to be aware of those before you make your choice as to what type of virtual lab you want to create. Now, in my situation, I'll tell you, I've chosen both. I have a physical lab environment that I do things like create training courses on or run more advanced features. I have a virtual lab environment. If I'm flying on an airplane, I can boot up VMware ESXi and I can test some feature or learn about something or write an article about a particular feature all on my laptop computer without any internet access. It's possible to run a virtual lab environment. So those are the pros and cons between virtual and physical lab environments. Now let's talk in a little bit more detail about building a physical lab environment. What you would need physical servers that are able to run VMware vSphere. These servers would need to be 64-bit. They would need to have either AMD V virtualization features or the Intel VT virtualization features built into the CPU. They'll need to have lots of RAM, as much RAM as you're able to afford, 8 gigabytes, 16 gigabytes, 32 gigabytes, as much RAM as you're able to put on those physical servers. You'll need some shared storage to perform advanced features of VMware vSphere, such as configuring high availability or distributed resource scheduler. You'll need some physical space in your office for these servers. They're not going to be small. If you get rack mount servers, I'll tell you firsthand, rack mount servers are loud. They're going to be somewhat annoying if they're sitting next to you or they're under your desk. So you'll need somewhere to put these servers that has power, that has cooling, and some space. And then finally, you'll need software. So you can try the vCloud Suite out at no cost for a full 2 months before having to incur any potential cost. Now, if you're a great blogger and you work really hard, you might be awarded the vExpert Award, which is from VMware. There's only about 400 people in the world, but they are given a vCloud Suite license for their home lab environment. If you're a VMware certified professional, you'll get your choice of VMware Workstation or Fusion that you could build a virtual lab environment with. And of course, you can also run the free VMware vSphere hypervisor that does not offer many of the advanced features like vMotion or vCenter, but it is a great Type 1 hypervisor that is very useful in building a home vSphere virtualization lab. So that's what you need to know about building a vSphere physical lab environment. Now let's talk about building a vSphere virtual lab environment. So you'll need a desktop or laptop computer. Your existing desktop or laptop may work just fine. It'll need to be 64-bit. It'll need to have Intel VT or AMD V virtualization features enabled in the BIOS. You'll need to have as much RAM as you can get. My MacBook Pro has 8 gigs of RAM, and I wish I had 16 gigs of RAM. And you'll need to have some high performance storage. That's many times the problem with desktop or laptop computers is they have, just slow SATA hard drives. They might have plenty of space, but the throughput on those drives is very low when you start running multiple virtual machines. So if you can get an SSD drive, you'll be so much better off. You'll be so thankful that you have it. My MacBook Pro has a 256 gig SSD drive, which is very high performance. It works great to run virtual machines in Fusion, but it's just not enough space, honestly. I need more space than that for the host operating system to run Mac OS X, and then a lot of space for a number of virtual machines that I'd like to have in my library. Of course, you'll need a hypervisor, such as VMware Fusion or Workstation, depending on whether or not you're running the Windows operating system or the Mac operating system as the host operating system. And then, again, you'll need the same VMware vSphere evaluation software available from VMware.com, good for 60 days. So that's what you need to know about building a virtual vSphere lab. Now I'd like to walk you through the process of running vSphere 5.1 inside VMware Fusion on an Apple Mac system. I've actually got a MacBook Pro that I'll be demonstrating this on. But if you don't have a Mac and you're not interested in running vSphere on a Mac, I want to tell you something very important. It's very easy to run VMware vSphere 5.1 inside VMware Workstation on a Windows desktop or laptop computer. I've got another lesson coming on doing exactly that, where I'll walk you through running vSphere inside VMware Workstation in the Windows operating system. So go check that lesson out if you're not interested in running vSphere on a Mac inside Fusion. If you are interested in vSphere inside Fusion, stay tuned, because that's what I'm about to show you. Let's first talk about the requirements and actually what I'm using to demonstrate this. You'll need a Apple Mac running VMware Fusion. You can go check out the Fusion system requirements. I'm not going to go into those here. They're available over at VMware.com on the Fusion documentation page. There's a document there called System Requirements for running VMware Fusion. So make sure that you meet those. And of course, you need the same Intel VT and 64-bit CPU. So you'll need a relatively recent Apple Mac system. Could be a desktop or laptop. In my case, I happen to have a MacBook Pro Retina. The display doesn't matter. I've got 8 gigs of RAM. I wish I had more, but it works great in 8 gigs. And an SSD hard drive. Again, SSD is not required, but it works great. Gives you more throughput than a traditional physical hard drive. You'll need VMware Fusion, and I recommend the latest version because it makes it much easier to run VMware vSphere. And then again, the 60-day evaluation of vSphere 5.1, or if you want to go for the gusto, get the 60-day evaluation of the vCloud suite. There's much more that you can run in there. So with that, let's go over to my Apple Mac computer, where I'll walk you through the process of running vSphere 5.1 inside VMware Fusion. Here I am on my Apple Mac system, and I've already downloaded the evaluation version of VMware Fusion. I'll just show you the version that I'm running here. If I do About Fusion, you can see it's 5.0.2. I've also already downloaded the ISO file for VMware ESXi 5. Of course, this is the hypervisor for VMware vSphere that you would install directly on a physical server, or in this case, inside a virtual machine, to simulate that same physical server. By just having a single VMware ESXi server, there's a number of things you can do, you can test, you can learn about, but to have a complete virtual infrastructure, or to completely simulate your production virtual infrastructure, of course you'd need more than just a single ESXi server. Most likely you'd need 2 ESXi servers, let's say a Windows virtual machine running VMware vCenter, perhaps a shared storage virtual machine, unless you have some out on the network that you could connect to, and then perhaps even, if you want it to be fully functional and portable, and simulate production, perhaps a Windows virtual machine as well, where you can run Windows Active Directory, DNS, DHCP, and the other traditional Windows infrastructure services. I'll tell you, this is actually my virtual lab that I use quite frequently inside VMware Fusion on my laptop, and that's the reason I already have a VMware ESXi server. I have a Windows 2012 Hyper-V server. Yes, you can run Hyper-V inside VMware Fusion. I've got a Windows 8 virtual machine that I use to simulate an end-user desktop, and then I have a number of other virtual machines. So what we'll be doing is to build a VMware ESXi 5 virtual machine just like this one, and then connect to it using the Vsphare client for Windows running on one of these Windows desktops. With Vsphare 5.1, of course, VMware recommends that you use the web-based client for VMware Vsphere. But to get that, what you're going to have to do is to install either the vCenter Server appliance, which you can do here inside Fusion, or the vCenter Server for Windows on a Windows virtual machine here inside Fusion. You should also keep in mind, since we're doing this on an Apple Mac, that the Vsphere client for Windows, currently the remote console functionality does not work if you're using a web browser on a Mac system. So if you want console access to your virtual machines, which most of us are going to want, you're going to still have to run the Vsphere client for Windows inside a Windows virtual machine, or you could actually use a web browser inside a Windows virtual machine connected to the Vsphere client for Windows. So without further delay, let's go ahead and get started. I'll just go up here to Add and down to New. I'll click Continue without disk because I'll tell you, if you insert the ISO for VMware ESXi 5, it won't recognize it. So what we need to do instead here is select our installation media by choosing a disk, and here's the VMware VMvisor installer. Notice it's a 64-bit, and if we scroll over, it's 315 megabytes. So it's not very large. I'll click Open here. It finds the disk. I'll click Continue. And this is one of the cool things about VMware Fusion with the latest edition, and also the latest edition of VMware Workstation, is that it recognizes VMware ESXi as an operating system. So of course you've got other operating systems here. Of course you can run Windows inside Fusion, Mac OS X, Linux, and among others VMware ESX. When it comes to the version, you can select either ESXi 5 or ESX/ESXi 4. We're installing VMware ESXi 5.1, which is why we're going to use the ESXi version 5. I'll click Continue here, and this is the default virtual machine configuration. I can just click Finish, actually install VMware ESXi 5, and I'll tell you, it will work. But if you want to do a little bit of tweaking, this is a good opportunity. We're going to give this a name. We'll call this Virtual Lab. I'll click Save here. It creates the virtual machine, and then we can go in here and we can do some tweaking if we want. I prefer to use networking that is connected to either Wi-Fi or auto detect or my standard Ethernet adapter instead of share with Mac. If you use the default of share with my Mac, that means that your ESXi 5 virtual machine is going to get a NATed IP address, and it's not going to be able to really receive inbound traffic from other servers out on the network that you're connected to. Now, if you're on an airplane, that's just fine. In fact, you really want to choose just private to my Mac. But most of the time, I really prefer the bridge networking option, which is going to be one of these down here, because your ESXi 5 virtual machine will have an IP address that's on the same network as your laptop or desktop and other computers out on the network. Let's go into the virtual hard disk, and I can tell you you've got two options here. One is, let's say that you're going to store all your virtual machines on shared storage, not on the local hard drive, or maybe you're just not even going to create any real virtual machines. You can shrink this virtual disk down very small. VMware ESXi uses very little disk space, as you can tell with the 300 megabyte installer. You could install VMware ESXi in, I'm not going to try to guess the minimum amount, and I haven't looked it up, but I could make this 5 gigabytes and not have any problems. And keep in mind that this virtual hard disk is also thin provisioned. It isn't thickly provisioned or fully allocated unless you check this checkbox here. So even if you were to Make this, let's say, 100 gigs or 250 gigabytes. VMware Fusion isn't going to allocate all of that disk space out of your physical hard drive on your Mac, laptop, or desktop unless you check the checkbox here, which I don't recommend. Now, I'm not crazy about splitting the disk file into multiple 2 gigabyte pieces, so I usually uncheck that. And, just to use simple round numbers, let's make this 100 gigabytes. I'll click Apply here. We'll go back to Show All. And then let's see if there's any other important options here that might be of value to tweak. So we've got 2 processor cores. I think that's really good unless you're going to try to run multiple virtual machines inside. And 2 gigs of RAM is enough if you want to run, let's say, just a single small virtual machine like 512 megabytes. But let's say that you wanted to actually power on a Windows 8 or a Windows 2012 server and allocate it, say, like 1 gigabyte of RAM or more. You might need to increase this to 3 gigabytes or 4 gigabytes to ensure that you have enough RAM in your virtualized ESXi server. I'll just take it back to the recommended 2 gigs. Let's go back to Show All here. Now, since this is a virtualized hypervisor, you're not going to use any USB features. You can see the CD drive is already mapped here. That's good. That's what we need. So at this point, everything looks good. Let's go ahead and close this out. We've got our virtual machine already created here. All we have to do is click Startup. And here we go. We're booting up the VMware ESXi hypervisor. You can see we're about to use the standard installer here in 1 seconds. And here we go. The installer is booting. And the boot process here will take just a few seconds. Here you can see that VMware ESXi is running on a VMware virtual platform. And this security request that comes up has to authorize the network adapter being in promiscuous mode. I'll say OK there. You can see we've got 2 Intel processors. They're i7 processors, 2.3 gigahertz. That's because that's what my physical MacBook Pro is running. And 2 gigabytes of RAM. That's the virtual RAM that we allocated. So VMware ESXi thinks that it's running on the VMware virtual platform as the hardware versus running directly on a physical server, because in that case it would say the name and model number of the physical server here. For example, a Dell T610 server. And that brings us to the installer. It says, welcome to the VMware ESXi 5.1 installation. All we have to do here is press Enter, and then we have to accept the end user license agreement by pressing F11. Now on a MacBook Pro keyboard, if you press F11 right here, that will lower your volume. So what you have to do is hold down the Fn key, or the key at the very bottom left corner of the keyboard function, and press F11. And here it says that the VMware ESXi installer found some local VMware storage. That's, of course, our virtual hard disk. You notice the size matches up there, 100 gigabytes. I'll just press Enter to take the default there. Again, I'll press Enter to select the default keyboard layout of US. Here I have to type the root password and confirm it again, which is a little different from ESXi 4.1. If you recall, it booted up with a blank password. I'll press Enter. Now let's say that you need to get your mouse out of here because I clicked on this black screen and my mouse is currently locked inside of the virtual machine console. But let's say I need to get my mouse out. I can hold down Control and press Command, and that releases my mouse. Of course, that's because the VMware tools aren't installed in this virtual machine running ESXi, and I'll tell you, they're not going to be either. So we'll click back in the screen. My little hand cursor disappears there. Now I need to press F11 to confirm the installation. So again, function F11, and the installation begins. This will take just a few seconds. And here we can see that the installation was complete. It says that ESXi 5.1 has been successfully installed. We'll just press Enter to reboot, and it will reboot, and start up with a 60-day evaluation license of VMware vSphere 5.1. And it'll take just a minute for the virtual machine to start up here. Let me move the screen over a little bit and try to resize it. There we go. Okay, and at this point, our new VMware ESXi 5.1 virtual machine inside Fusion has booted up. We can see there we have received a DHCP IP address 10.0.1.111, and to log into the system, we press F2. Well, you know, on a Mac keyboard, you're going to have to hold down Function and press F2, or else you're going to increase the brightness of your display. So I'll log in as root and enter the password that I created during the installation process. And here we get what they call the DCUI, or the Direct Console User Interface. So this is basically a text-based menu interface where you can configure things like networking, test your networking, configure the keyboard, troubleshooting options, view system logs, view support information, and reset the ESXi host back to its defaults. Typically, the most common thing here that administrators have to do is go in and configure the network. So let's say that I wanted to configure a static IP address here. I could choose the static IP address option and save that. I could also configure DNS information, DNS suffixes, VLAN, network adapters. I could have multiple network adapters here that I configure ESXi to recognize or not. And then once I configure it, I can go down here and I can restart the management network. I can test the management network, and we see there that we can communicate with our default gateway and our DNS servers, but the resolving of the host name, localhost, which is the default, failed because I haven't created a DNS entry yet for this virtual machine. Now, to connect the Vsphere client to this ESXi host, honestly, there's nothing you have to do in here. So I'll just press escape to log out. What you need is that IP address right there. So let's go over to one of my other virtual machines. We'll go into this Windows 2012 virtual machine where I've actually already downloaded and installed the VMware Vsphere client for Windows. Of course, you can do that by simply going to the web-based interface for the ESXi host. And clicking right here, download VMware Vsphere client. So that'll give you the Vsphere client for Windows that you can run inside a Windows virtual machine. Of course, if you want to use the web-based Vsphere client or just have centralized management or use advanced features, you'll need to download VMware vCenter here. So let's close this. Let's open up the VMware vSphere client. I'll type in the IP address of the new ESXi virtual machine. Type in my root username and password. We'll accept the security warning here and click to ignore it. That's a standard message. And we're able to successfully log into our new virtual ESXi server. Again, we're using a 60-day evaluation license here that you can download free from vmware.com. And if I maximize this window here, it's very easy to just go in. And yes, I can create a new virtual machine. I can just take all the defaults here. We created a virtual machine. Let's right-click on it and power it on. I'll select the virtual machine. I'll open up the console. And no, we haven't yet installed any operating system, but this is a fully functioning virtual machine nested inside a virtual ESXi server. So from here, all we need to do is connect this virtual machine to our virtual CD DVD drive. Could be an ISO image that we download, most likely, let's say from Microsoft TechNet even, if you've got a TechNet subscription, or you can download evaluation editions of Windows Server 2012, Windows 8, or of course use the Linux operating system in most cases for free. You can even download virtual appliances from the VMware Virtual Appliance Marketplace, many of which are also free. So at this point, we successfully virtualized VMware ESXi server, and then we've connected to it using the VMware vSphere client inside a Windows virtual machine. I could continue with this scenario and build out, let's say, another ESXi virtual machine, a VMware vCenter virtual machine, a shared storage virtual machine using OpenFiler, providing iSCSI storage area network shared storage so that I could test advanced features like vMotion, storage vMotion, distributed resource scheduler, high availability, all of those will work inside this virtual environment as long as you have enough RAM and CPU and disk capacity on the host, in this case the Mac OS X desktop or laptop computer where you're running VMware Fusion. So this concludes the end of the demonstration, and with that, let's go back to our slides. And with that, we've reached the end of this lesson covering how to build a vSphere lab environment. I started off by talking about why it's important to build a lab environment. There's a number of good reasons. In my opinion, every VMware virtualization admin needs a lab environment. From there, I talked about the pros and cons of building it with physical servers or running it virtually on your existing desktop or laptop computer. And then finally, I ended the lesson by demonstrating for you how to run VMware vSphere 5.1 inside Fusion on a Mac system. Again, if you're interested in running vSphere 5.1 on a Windows system inside Workstation, I hope you'll check out that lesson where I walk you through that process. It's very easy to do. Thanks for watching this lesson on building a vSphere 5.1 lab environment.